Well, welcome back to the True Roots podcast, where men find their true identity in Christ through surrender and obedience. I'm here with Dan Cox. I'm Andy Harris, and we are excited to be here for episode 2, which is Dispelling Lies and Replacing Them with Truth. So we're excited to talk about that. I was excited yesterday. I think it was yesterday or the day before when we talked just a little bit about some of those lies that you've believed growing up, and then some of the stories around how you were believing those lies and then what the truth was that you replaced them with. And so I just want to start off today with asking you, what is one of those lies? And then how did that switch for you?
Yeah. Well, I think the first one that's probably worth sharing is there's a verse Paul writes, I have this thorn in my side. And God's given it to me, and then he goes on to say that, but I'll praise the Lord for my, his strength is seen in my weakness, right? And I think I had, through struggles with sexual sin from like 8th grade through, 28 or 7 or whatever it was, I had believed that was my thorn in my side, and that it would just be this perpetual fight and wrestling and fall, slip, get back up, try again, try a new behavior modification, thorn in the side hasn't gone away, but maybe it's less painful or pulled out part of it, but it's still there. And through the course of dating and engagement with my now wife, she just really was like, well, that doesn't sound very biblical. And the verse, Galatians 5:1, Paul also writes, it's for freedom that we've been set free. And Jesus says, I came that you might have life and life abundant. And that doesn't square up with a thorn in the side when it comes to sin and something that steals our relationship from the Lord. And like the whole point of that was that it would push Paul into more of Jesus, and Jesus would be more clearly seen. But in my wrestlings and my strugglings and this thorn in my side with sexual sin, I was hiding Jesus more. And so anyways, I just was believing this lie, and it turns out that's not true. Jesus did come to like give freedom. And I just had to go, no, Jesus is not content with me like having this sin struggle my whole life. Like Jesus came to remove those things and heal those things and restore and redeem those things. And so, yeah, like once I was confronted with the fact that actually isn't true, it could start to die away, right? So that's the first one that came to mind.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's funny, it kind of dovetails a little bit into one of mine with self-control. And what you talk about in that beginning piece with behavior modification is that it was on you. Like you're talking about the thorn in your side, and I think as you talked about that with me previously, just about how that can be misinterpreted in that sin piece where it's like we're just going to struggle with this sin forever. But I think a piece of that too is that we try to control it. We think that self-control means we have to do it, that I'm the one who has to take care of this sin, and I'm the one who has to make sure that it gets out of my life. And in reality, that's not where self-control comes from. And one of the lies that I believed is that self-control is on me. I mean, it's the word. It says self-control. So I have to do it in order to be self-controlled. But that's not biblical either. It says in John 15 to abide in him, and that the fruit will come from abiding in him. And we're just a branch in that. And so we talked about this a little bit last week, but the fruits of the Spirit, which self-control is the last one, and the fruits of the Spirit. And again, I say fruits, it actually says fruit. Like we should have all of that. It's one fruit, right? All of those things are a fruit. But it comes from abiding in Jesus. And so the self-control piece, you're talking about sexual sin, and that's where it applies to me the most as well, is I didn't think I could ever be free. I thought I'm going to struggle with this my whole life as well. And if I have accountability and I have things on my phone, then I can at least have control of it and it'll be better. But I'll never be able to walk into a room and not be afraid if a pretty woman walks in there. And I think that's something that's common for a lot of men. It's like, oh, I don't know. I got to look away. I got to avert my eyes. Every Man's Battle I actually struggle with as a book in general, just because it talks about
It's
all of the
normalizing, right?
yeah, it's all about the behavior modification, like what we can do. Say what you just said again.
Normalizing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but in reality, Christ wants to give us freedom in that.
Yeah.
And so to have self-control means to rely on the Spirit, to rely on Jesus, to rely on his word, to spend time with him each day. And that's how we gain self-control. And the way that I was able to overcome sexual sin was because I didn't overcome it like the Lord did. And it was through prayers like, Lord, I give you my sexuality. Your power is made perfect in my weakness. It's funny you talk about those things that Paul said, because it's the same verses that I would pray over and over. And his power is made perfect in our weakness. So if his power is made perfect, not just good, but perfect, then it's actually in our weakness when we come to him that he's able to show up, and now he's able to give us the freedom that we can walk in and walk forward.
Yeah, I think it was my dad actually sent me this quote. It was about the idea of walking with Jesus. Thinking about this as you were talking about the Holy Spirit, like the idea that like we should think about Jesus or hold Jesus in our mind at all times is like literally impossible, right? Like, and so it feels a little bit discouraging to think about it that way. And the quote, I'll just paraphrase it because it was kind of long, but the idea was that that's not actually a good way to represent like walking with Jesus or being with Jesus in perpetuity or constantly. A better way to think about it is like having Jesus in your eye. And the analogy that the quote made was, we as people go about our day aware of and mindful of the sun and the light of the sun. And so we make choices and decisions and interact with our world aware of and mindful of the light of the sun. And in the same way, we ought to do that with Jesus. Like, we should have this awareness and mindfulness of the light of Christ in our like everyday interactions and things we do, so that like always kind of like in our mind's eye, right? Like we see it, we see him. And that's different than willing ourselves to be something. It's like, oh, I'm shaped by this thing I'm seeing, right? Like that's creating and altering my reality is Jesus Christ and the light of Christ. And it was just like a interesting change of mind. It moved it from this internal like part of me thing to Jesus, and the truth of Jesus is almost surrounds me, right, in my life, and it changes your reality, right? And then you're just living in a different way versus like trying to force something out of yourself that feels a little bit difficult to even find sometimes, or to hold in your mind or whatever. I'm probably butchering it, but the analogy felt so compelling, right? Holding it in my mind's eye. And it's not a willpower, self-control thing, right? Like that at that point, it's just an awareness, right? Yeah. And I love, like I said, Galatians 5:1, you know, freedom. Yeah. Right after that is the fruit of the Spirit. Yeah. And then the very end of that, Paul says, against these things, there is no law. Basically, like, go do them as much as possible, right? And I just like, how encouraging is that language versus the typical narrative of like, don't do these things, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you, right? And then just hide.
Yeah. Well, I have two things to add to that. I think for one, the eye analogy, I mean, that's biblical too, right? Like, fix your eyes on Jesus. Yeah. Like, he's the author and perfecter of your faith. So, and when we fix our eyes, where we focus our attention, that's what's going to grow in our life. And so when we fix our eyes on Jesus, he's going to grow, and all of these things are going to come from that. Whereas fix our eyes on the behavior we need to change, and we're just going to focus on that behavior, and that's where we're going to go. Which, it sounds funny. It's like we want to focus on it so that we get rid of it. But in reality, when we focus on it, that's where our mind actually wants to go. And I think that's a big key in why Jesus says, fix your eyes on me. And I think that analogy just fits so perfectly in that. And then the interesting thing, I think, with fruit and what you're talking about with the fruits of the Spirit is those only come from abiding. And yet we want to chase the fruit. is we want to be self-controlled. So I need to go try to be self-controlled. I want to be loving. So I need to go focus on how to be loving. It's like, no, like those things come from spending time with Jesus and going after Jesus. And it sounds funny because I've talked with people about this. It's like, wow, I get annoyed. People are like, just go to Jesus. Just spend time with Jesus. Just do this with Jesus. It's like, well, what about the prep? Like, I need to do this and this and this. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But the reason that we say go to Jesus is because I think a lot of times we're really good at the practical. We're really good at, hey, I need to do this step and this step and this step, but I don't want to abide in him.
Yeah.
I don't want to spend time with him. I mean, you could talk to people about self-help books all the time. It's like, well, I've read this and I've read this. Well, do you read your Bible daily? No. Well, then that doesn't matter. If you're not spending time with Jesus daily, then what you're reading is not going to do the same things that he could do from just spending that time with him and getting to know him.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, okay, let's get back to what matters, you know?
Yeah.
Because there's lots of distractions.
Lots of distractions. Yeah. So let's go into give me another lie. Like, what's another thing that you've believed and a way that you've overcome it with truth?
I mean, this is a little bit less constant or prominent in my life now, but when I grew up an athlete and played college basketball, and until my last year of college, my identity was a basketball player. Like, yes, I had other things I did, but the way I actually thought about myself and the way I thought people viewed me was a basketball player. And it was justified to some degree because, you know, if you think about college athletes and playing college basketball, the reason I went to the school I went to was to play basketball. The classes I got were because of basketball and around my schedule. The times I woke up were because of basketball. The things I ate were because of basketball. The people I hung out with were because of basketball. Like, it was all centered around this thing. And so no wonder my identity was attached so intimately to that.
Yeah.
And then my junior year, you know, I'm being told all these things. It's like, okay, this was my last year of college. It was like, okay, Dan, this is your year. You're going to, like, it's going to be great. And go 5th game of the year, I'm in the starting lineup. Doesn't go well for any of the starting 5. Our team's losing. All 5 of us get benched to start the second half. And the rest of the other 4 get back in at some point in the second half. I don't see the floor. And basically from that point on, I went from prior to that being like the first guy off the bench to like 7th, 8th, 9th guy in the rotation and no real explanation. And so it was like really disorienting for me. And it was hard, like really hard being having my identity in that. And I'm grateful for it now. Like, I look back on it and what I recognize God was doing was in a slow, gentle way, removing that identity, right? Versus the alternative would have been had a great year, played all the way through, and then immediate cutoff. But I had to wrestle with it for months. And I got this opportunity to come to the recognition and realization that this isn't what defines me and move through that and recognize that first and foremost, I am a child of God. That when the thing I thought I was isn't returning what it promised, where do I go? It's like Peter when he says, he's talking to Jesus and he's like, Lord, but like, where else would we go? You have the words of life. And it's like in that moment when my identity was somewhat stripped away from me, where did I go? And it was like, oh, I'm a child of God. And I could like reset and remind myself, this is a lie. This is not who I am. I have been called a child of God. And you know, I haven't looked back, right? Like there's temptations towards other identities.
Yeah, for sure.
But that one's always been the anchor point since that point. So.
Well, and it reshapes exactly how you live your life when that's the anchor point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Which is crazy. And as you're talking about that, it's just reminding me. It's funny, like some of these things. It's funny how these things just tie together in terms of lies that we believe. Because really, anything outside of Jesus is a lie, right? Like I think that's in terms of our identity. And what's funny is that's what happened. As you talked about, that's what happened with me. Is you talked about where do I run or where do I go if
Yeah.
this is not here? And that's what happened in my story. And one of the lies that I believed is that I'm an inconsistent man and can't be consistent, which I'll explain here in a second. But this just reminded me of my story is when my identity was in my marriage, my identity was in my job, my identity was in being a baseball coach, it was in all of these things. So when all of these things start to fall apart, I got to see where I ran.
Yeah.
And where did I run? To alcohol, to porn, to food, to a lot of other things like that. That's where I went because I thought those would satisfy the longing I had in my soul. And the lie that I believed is that God couldn't satisfy those things. Like he couldn't be what I needed because those were what I needed.
Was it that lie or was it, because it could be,
Yeah.
but I wonder if it was also God isn't, I'm too far gone for God to
yeah.
do that, right? It's more like
Yeah.
I'm not able, like prodigal son, like I can't receive what God says he would give. Like, was it that, or was it actually?
No, that's a good question because yes, absolutely. When I got to the too far gone part that I would say is where I thought I was too far gone, that definitely was a lie.
Yeah.
I think the lie leading up to that
Prior.
is that these things will satisfy and he won't. And so when those things started to fall apart, then I ran to the other things, and then that lie certainly came.
I'm
where
curious.
It's like I couldn't come back.
I'm curious why you would in that moment thought that God couldn't satisfy. Was it previous experience? Was it just a like greater attraction to these things? Like what was it that created that lie?
Yeah, I think for one, the idolization of other things in my life. I think whatever we put on a pedestal, we're gonna worship, and that was marriage for me. Like I wanted to be married as a kid. I was like a young girl. That's all I know. It's like all I wanted. It's kind of funny, but I think that's what I wanted so badly that I had just built this lie in my head that was everything.
Yeah.
That once I get that, then everything's going to be good. And so it wasn't, because I grew up in church. It's like I became a Christian when I was 11, baptized when I was 11, but I had built this lie and learned to hide actually really from the church and from family life growing up. And so I had this lie in my head that once I got to this point, like think about porn, like, man, once I can have sex and marriage, like that's just going to go away. Like, no, it just makes it worse if you haven't actually walked into healing with the Lord, or you're going to have to deal with it with your wife as well. And so because I had built all these things up, I think I had just put God in this place of wife here, God here, and then it just started to elevate other things as well. Because then if I was doing well in my life and I felt good, then I was okay. But when it fell apart, I got to see where my true allegiance was and where my identity lied, which was not in the Lord. And I think I didn't realize that until later.
Yeah.
I mean, you might know it a little bit as you grow up, but you don't understand where you're idolizing things until things start to fall apart.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people in this world, I would say, that were really like me, where they're right now they're idolizing things because they're going well, and if they fell apart, we'd run somewhere else. And that's really what happened. And so when God brought me to my knees and did that, and I went to that place and finally was at a place of like, I can't go anywhere else. Like I have to, I was eating the pig slop, like the prodigal son.
Yeah.
It's like, I have to go home. I have to
Yeah.
go home. And I didn't want to go home. But I remember doing that. And when I surrendered, he just welcomed me with open arms. He's like, you're a new creation. The old's gone, the new's come.
Yeah.
And that one truth was how my life got reshaped. That one truth that I'm a new creation. Now, I had to walk through a lot of things after that, right? I think that's the thing with truth, is that truth allows you to walk through stuff that's scary and hard and difficult because you know that his truth, the only truth, like this thing right here is the truth. And we try to put so many other truths out there saying like your truth, my truth, all the different things. Like, no, there's one truth. And this truth really will set you free. I mean, people in the world will say truth will set you free. It's like, yeah, that's from the Bible.
Yeah.
And it's only this truth because it's the only truth. And it's the funniest thing. Like I'm kind of going in different directions here, but like The craziest thing with lies and truth is that we will walk into what we choose to believe. And so if we're believing a lie, that's where we're going to walk. And if we're believing truth, that's where we're going to walk. And they go hand in hand. And so as you start to walk into lies, then they become true in your mind. And so you're going to keep walking that lie because you believe that it's going to satisfy, you believe that it's going to do something. When you start to walk in truth, now behaviors can change, even though the way that I walked the last 2 to 3 years were harder than any other years in my life. But why was I able to walk them? Because I was walking in truth. And in the truth, why does it set you free? Because you see that it's true. Like you start to walk it and you'll see that he will show up and he will be there. So,
well, and it separates you from the result, right? Mm-hmm. Like lies of the enemy and the world system is so driven by like the external result. And so you think about like, why do people get married? It's, I want to be happy and you make me happy. Mm-hmm. And like, what's the result of that? Oh, you actually didn't. You disappointed me. Bye. And, oh, I want this job from this employer. Mm-hmm. Like, this is going to pay me well. It's going to make me happy. I'm going to have a purpose. Oh, you didn't. Bye. And it's results driven. But when you are walking in truth, when you're walking with the Lord, and it becomes less about the result and all about the relationship. Mm, yeah, and you have this peace that isn't yours, right? Like the result that you're after is being generated by the Lord in your life versus you being the one trying to generate the result and it always falling short, right? And so you have this like profound, when you are walking with the Lord, you're walking in truth, you are walking with peace. Mm-hmm. And so the result is something that you can surrender and it no longer affects that peace, right? And so there's just like a totally different way of functioning.
Yeah. Well, and it just brings so much freedom, right? It brings that freedom. I mean, we were talking before the show started about authority in men and the fear that if we are vulnerable, we're going to lose our authority. Like we can't lead through vulnerability because once they know this about me, then I'm going to lose my authority. Well, when it's not about you, it's about Jesus, and then it's not about the control, then now I can be free to just lead from vulnerability, to share the struggles that I have. And what's crazy is when you do that, it actually will bring more authority and you'll be able to share, and you'll bring people on your team will now feel like they can share. I mean, all of those things are true.
Well, people see God in you, right? Like when it's about you and what you did, they don't see God, they see you. Yeah. And then they're like sitting in the corner like, well, I'm not that, right? How the heck am I ever going to get there? I don't have that skill set or I don't have that experience. But if it's God that did it, it's like, oh, I can ask God for help. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's like, help me understand like tell me more about God. Yeah. Right? Like it's just like, so it's
which is really what it's all about.
That's the whole point.
That's
right?
the whole point.
So
the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just brings me to that other one too. It's like control everything and then let God take care of the rest. It's like, It's like God's in control and I just need to be obedient to what he says. And if I'm doing that, then I can walk freely.
Yeah.
I don't have to be afraid because you're right. Like the outcome we're not chasing the outcome. We're chasing Jesus and allowing him to take care of all the outcomes and just doing the things that he asks.
Totally.
And that's how we walk in truth.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. We could probably talk for a long time about lies. I think there are hundreds of them, right? Like the devil is the father of lies. Yeah, and the world we live in is broken and fallen. It's his kingdom for the time being. Jesus has brought the kingdom in and through the church, but around us is this kingdom that is built on lies. Yeah. And we're supposed to be in it, but not of it. And so you have to there just needs to be an acknowledgement. And anyone who says Jesus is who I'm following, there has to be an acknowledgement that our fight is always going to be bringing truth into this world 100%. Of lies. Like nothing is what it seems with the devil, right? And his system. And like, how do we stay mindful of that and hold it up against truth and ask the Lord for help? And at the end of the day, walk with him through it. And so, there's endless lies, right?
There are endless lies.
But there is one constant truth and like so much peace in that.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll just end it with this: is that we as men will talk about, I mean, I think this women too, but we as men will talk about, we believe this, especially Christian men. I believe this because I'm a Christian. Well, if you're not walking in it, you don't believe it. And now there are certain levels to that in terms of like when I'm walking in a new truth, like I'm on unstable ground as I start to walk and it gets solidified. But a lot of times we'll say, yeah, I believe that. But you don't really. We don't really until we're actually walking in it. And that's where we start to show that I believe that. And again, it's a process because we will look at this truth like my power is made perfect in weakness. I will boast all the more gladly. I don't want to share that. And that step of faith to share that, you will start to see that power will show up, but you have to take that vulnerable piece to walk in it. And the reason I bring this up is that we will say we believe something, but really what we're saying is, I want to believe that until we actually walk in it. Then you believe it. And that's where lies and truth are so important to dispel those lies. You're right. The father of lies, like there's so many lies, but we have to be rooted in truth. Like true roots there's a reason for the name. Like we have to be rooted in truth, and we have to be spending that time with the Lord, not in a like, oh, I got to go read my Bible daily. Not in this like legalistic piece of it. It's because you want to know him. And know truth. And that's how you actually start to walk in it, is by knowing it on a daily basis. And so I wanted to share just a couple of things here as we end today. Is actually we created a True Roots community. And in there, I've also created a belief matrix, which shows how to dispel some of these lies, like come up with some of those lies that you have believed for your whole life. And there's a different section in there. And then believe truth, like what are truths that are different than those lies? And then some action pieces that you can take on top of that. So there's a link in the bio on YouTube for those that are listening on YouTube. And then there'll be a description in the Apple Podcast for that group. And so when you join that group, I will send you that belief matrix, which I'm excited about to get that out there and share. Just created that. So pretty excited about that. And I think that's where we're going to end for today. And excited to have you come back for episode 3 next week. So have a great day. We'll see you.
Bye.